We're here at Super Return Africa 2014. So what's the business case for investing in agriculture in Africa?
You know, Africa today is, a continent that still has 65% of the world's arable land. It's a continent that is, you need it to feed the world. You're thinking about feeding 9 billion people by 2050. You really need Africa. So it's just something that you have to look at. And agriculture specifically, you have a growing population, you have a young population, you have growing middle class, you have rising incomes across the board, and people want to eat food, So you definitely need it, specifically for Nigeria, as we think about it, and that's the space I work in. We have about 84 million hectares of arable land. We have about 3 of the rivers in Africa, the largest rivers in Africa in terms of water resources. We have people, the labor force. We're the largest economy right now in Africa. So, as you think about where the oil prices are going today, Nigeria has taken a very focused effort in diversifying its economy. And to do that, agriculture that accounts for about 40% of our GDP, it's where to look at. You have to create jobs for the young people. You have to basically, really just progress the economy in many ways, and we believe that agriculture is where it is. Specifically, as you think about it from an investment standpoint,
sure.
The returns are great. Agriculture is no longer what you'd say, oh, this hoe and cutlass somewhere, it's only about farms in some corner somewhere, but it's across the value chain. What we did in Nigeria at the government is to take agriculture as a full business, show that it's a wealth-creating sector, and not just sticking to just one part of, just farming, for example. But that farmer has to find a market. He has to sell his produce to ShopRite, for example, or to Walmart. So taking the entire value chain approach from production to processing to marketing to retail is what we've done, and we believe that's where all the opportunity lies.
Well, speaking of what you've done, I'm aware that the government in Nigeria has created a fund. What do you think is the role of government in making sure there's a conducive environment for investors that are interested in agriculture?
In agriculture, no, it's right. We did, something that's very innovative. We actually set up a private equity fund that is a target of $100 million. We did it in collaboration with KfW, the German Development Bank, and also the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. It's their first investment in Nigeria. And we basically did this and gave it to a private GP to manage the fund. Commercial fund, they have about a target of about 22% IRR. So we were really showing in line with agriculture being a business. So what was the government's role here? We catalyzed it. We designed the fund. We basically knew what we wanted to get out of it. We found that there was a shortage of financing. Up to about $15 billion is required in financing agricultural financing demand in Nigeria. So we needed to do something. So government plays a big role in stimulating that investment. We have the funds to a large extent. We can take that initial risk. We can demonstrate to investors that this is a place to be and put that capital to work. And so that's a big play there, catalyze the investments. But a big second thing is to create the right environment. We call it in Nigeria a government-enabled but a private sector-driven agricultural transformation. Government is there to create the right policies, make sure that if it's infrastructure you require, let's help to put that in place, that power line, let's put that road in place for you to get your rice from one place to another. So it's really a big part of it is the policies and the enabling environment for investors to feel comfortable that their money is protected and their investments are protected, but it's also to demonstrate and catalyze investment and growth in the sector.
So, I mean, you mentioned a couple of challenges in terms of whether it's infrastructure or even finance.
Yeah.
Are there other challenges that you think it's probably over the years been preventing investors from coming into this sector?
Yeah.
And what are the key things? I know policies, but what are sort of one or two things that they need to be aware, the investors, as they see these challenges in such a sector?
Yeah. No, I think it is right that there are challenges that have kept people away, and we weren't going to just sit and rely on rhetoric. We actually have evidence-based research. We got Monitor Deloitte, a top global consulting firm, to do some research and surveys with some investors. We surveyed about over 75 agribusiness investors, operational strategics, and financial investors, and we asked them, what is your pain point? And the largest by far, the 87% cited as a challenge, was infrastructure. A second one was financing at 56%, who cited that. And after that, we had supply security. So if you're an agribusiness investor and you're a processor or whatever, you need to make sure that if I'm doing cassava to starch, like maybe Cargill is doing, for example, they want to make sure that they can get access to the cassava roots. Or if Aliko's $1 billion investment in rice processing, he wants to make sure he can buy the rice paddy and he can grow it. So what we tell investors in many cases, for example, with the supply security, don't only depend on the outgrowers. Have your own nucleus farm. You can have a little bit and take care of some of your supply as well. We as a government, for infrastructure, will support you. We have something that we set up called the staple crop processing zones, which is kind of like your export processing zones, but it's all about agriculture, domestic import substitution, where the government upgrades infrastructure in a space, where we provide fiscal incentives as well. And this is all to attract private sector investors to areas of high food production. So that while they're in that space, that zone, that has upgraded infrastructure and all of that, they're also in an area where they can easily source their roots, and it can be processed right there, and they can take it to the farm. So we're thinking along the lines to really address many of these issues.
Okay. You've mentioned, you've given us a solid business case to invest in agriculture. You've mentioned, the role of government and working with the likes of Dangote. In your presentation, you talked about several strategic investors like Nestle, Olam, that have actually invested in this sector. Is there what do financial investors need to be aware of? Are you working with financial investors? Your typical GP that is not a strategic at all, but has funds that's been just dedicated to mostly other sectors like FMCG. What are you doing with them?
With them? No, definitely we work with them. I speak to these folks on a weekly basis. Some of the logos I put up on my presentation actually had some financial investors. For example, Verod Capital. They're here today. They're a fund manager out in Nigeria. And the MDs of that fund would tell you any day that they've done 2 agricultural investments in the past 2 years. They had never done agriculture. They've done their canning factory and all of that. But they would tell you that it was because of this government's new policies in agriculture and what we were doing to attract private sector that today they've now invested in what will be a 10,000 metric ton fish farming facility, aquaculture, and it will be the largest in Africa. And they've also recently invested in a horticulture in an orchard that does FMCG, that goes on to use the fruits to do fruit concentrate and produce juices to sell to the market. So that's exciting. We work with these investors across the board, operational and financial, and they're all coming in to Nigeria's agriculture. The market, the opportunity is huge.
Well, clearly the opportunity is huge. Thank you, Ada. Very interesting, and I think you've made a case for everyone, both the financial investors and the strategic investors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aure. It's a pleasure.